I love the art of what I do, but it's actually more for me about the communication. And what I mean by that is that I wasn't one of those filmmakers who started out with like this obsessive mental Rolodex of every great film or all of these super unusual camera stuff. I always came from it from a standpoint of story and communication. And so for me, my goal is to tell big stories to a big audience.
You're listening to The Other 50%, A Herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. This week I spoke with Ramaa Mosley. Ramaa is an accomplished commercial, music video, and film director, an activist, and an entrepreneur. We covered the gamut from her career as a director, which started around 16, and she told us about starting her company called Adolescent Content, which represents young content creators and directors to national brands and distributes professional content by very young creators. She also worked on a beautiful film called Girl Rising that speaks to the vital importance of educating girls around the world. There is a lot in this jam-packed interview, and you can now see an excerpt of this interview on my new YouTube channel, The Other 50%, A Herstory of Hollywood. You can also find us at theother50%.com to see bios, photos, my musings on the blog, the coffee cups, the t-shirts. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, Podbay, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. Please help spread the word and share this podcast with at least one friend today. And I have another podcast called The Other 50%, A Herstory of Tech. You can also find it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or on the Other 50% website. That's where I talk to successful women in tech and hear their stories. Okay, here's Ramaa. What do you do?
Well, I direct commercials and movies. And I founded a company called Adolescent Content, which represents Gen Z creators, directors, photographers, to work creating branded content, commercials, entertainment, and still photography.
I love it. And didn't you also work on that film, Girls Rising?
Yes, I directed the Afghan segment of Girl Rising.
It's just Girl Rising, not Girls?
Yeah, Girl Rising, yeah. Exactly.
That was a beautiful film. So tell me, did you always want to be a director? Did you always know that that was what you wanted to do?
You know, from the age of 13, I knew I wanted to be a director. I just didn't know how I was going to get there because I was raised in Ojai, which is a really small town. None of my family was even closely connected to the industry. My mom's a teacher and my dad was a mechanic and then a bookkeeper. And so I had this dream, but no idea how to really reach it. And one day I was walking down the street in our main, street. I was walking down the street in Main Street, and I saw a film crew. And I just was like drawn to it, and all these people working in the camera, and I ended up wandering on set and going up to the director and begging him to let me stay and to work with them. And he said yes. And so for 3 months I followed them around, and he let me get water, he let me be an extra, he taught me everything that he could teach a 13-year-old, and he became my mentor.
Who was that?
His name is Lawrence Lanoff, and he is no longer a director. He's moved into something different, but he was a really important mentor for me in helping me launch my career as a storyteller and as a filmmaker.
What was he shooting at the time?
He was shooting a little film that was, I think, ended up going to theaters. I cannot remember the name, but he was shooting a film, yeah.
Just an independent feature?
Independent feature.
And how long did it take you to figure out, okay, which one of these people is the director?
Well, I figured it out pretty quickly because it was the person who was telling everyone what to do. Like, I could tell that there was a person...
Someone's in charge here.
Somebody was in charge. And so I went to him. And he was so generous. He let me use his Bolex camera. He let me come in and use his editing machines. So I just started making things. And at 16, I made my first commercial, which was a commercial for Naked Juice, which was, now Naked Juice has been bought.
Huge,
actually. Yeah. It was a smaller company, and I had reached out to them, and they ended up, working with me, and so that was the very first thing that I created.
Were they in Ojai?
They were not. They were...
How'd you pick them?
Because I really liked their juice. And I was young, and I just thought, this is so great. And I also made a documentary called We Can Make a Difference that was about the environmental problems and how young people saw them. Mm-hmm. And Lawrence basically let me use all his equipment, helped guide me through it, helped me with the editing. And that film went on to win the United Nations Environmental Program Global 500 Award, which was given out to like Jacques Cousteau and amazing people doing great work in the environment. And so doing that really synthesized for me, I want to be a director. Like up until then...
Hold on. How old were you?
I was 16. Yeah.
Okay, carry on. So that clinched it for you.
That clinched it because sitting in the audience watching people watch my movie, my documentary, was so incredible. And then all of the things that came from that, like the awards and, you know, working with the United Nations and becoming a delegate, I really was hooked. And very quickly I started to be hired to make work professionally. And I was signed by a production company. There was like a bidding war over me. Like I had people offering me all this money to sign with them.
To do commercials or?
Do commercials, which was a bit of a leap because I had thought that I would be directing features. I really thought that I would be the first youngest female to win an Oscar because I was like totally focused on features. But then commercials came and suddenly I was swept up into that. And throughout college I was directing and putting myself through school through directing and came out and just was like boom right into my career.
That's amazing. Where'd you go to college?
Bennington College.
Where is that?
It's in Vermont.
Did you study film there?
No, I studied liberal arts, and I went there because my mentor, Lawrence, had gone there, and his dad, after like a year, came and made him leave because they were so artistic and eccentric, and he thought he should do something else. So he was like, "This is the school for you," and he really was because I had been homeschooled for most of my childhood, and so I really was like a outside the box thinker, and so and Bennington is very much like. Create your create your bliss, create your major,
Yeah, create your degree.
Yeah, create what you want. And so my degree was historical photography and directing theater. That was pretty much.
That's incredible. That must have been so fun.
It was so fun. I really did enjoy it.
So would you, like on breaks, come do a commercial or?
Yes, there was 3 breaks at Bennington. So there was the summer break, and there was the winter break, and then there was a thing called field work term. So all in all, you're actually only in school for like 6 months out of the year. So during those breaks, I would come back to Los Angeles and work.
So I imagine you made enough money to pay for school and...
I was on a full scholarship because my family didn't have money, and so that was taken care of, but I ended up being able to make enough money that when I graduated within that year, I paid off all of my student loans and all of the little things.
So you didn't really struggle to get in as a director, it sounds like.
The truth of the matter is that I didn't. That in so many ways, I was really lucky, especially as a female director, to have this door open up, and I just flew into it. The thing that's been interesting to me is that my original dream was always to be a storyteller, was to direct movies. So my vision was that I would direct big blockbuster tentpole films. And because I chose to go into commercials and because it was so exciting and I was traveling the world at a very young age and making quite a lot of money, I didn't really focus on the development of scripts and developing, my storytelling side. And so somewhere around my mid-20s, I was like, oh my God, I need to get back to that.
Yeah, wait a second.
That's like my real goal is to, I love commercials, but my real goal is to also make movies. And so what I found is that that's where the struggle actually has been, because
to cross over,
to cross over, to find the right stories, to have the stamina to really keep focused on trying to get that movie made and to, make it happen it just is incredible. Whereas everything else was so easy when it came to music video directing and commercial directing, the feature film element has been much more about working hard and really digging in.
Because you're trying to direct something that you're developing yourself rather than go out as a director for hire?
I was wanting to do both. I think I had an idea that like studios and networks were just going to contact me because that's what had happened with the commercial side.
Yeah,
I just was
they
found.
Found you.
And so I didn't think about agents. I didn't think about managers. I just thought people will find me. And then when I was like, oh, well, it's time to make this happen, what I was learning was that you have to have something to show beyond commercials in order to get representation and get things made. And so it took me longer to put that together and to figure out what it is I wanted to make. So I made a series of short films, and some of them won awards, and I ended up ultimately finding a short story that I really loved called The Brass Teapot. And the writer of that short story and I developed a whole comic book series out of it. Because I come from this background of loving comic books, like seriously loving comic books. And so I felt like, okay, Marvel comics, DC comics, those, it seemed so out of my reach at the time. I'm going to make my own. And so we created this comic book, we wrote this screenplay, and it was around that we were able to raise the financing and package my first feature film.
Brilliant. Did you also sell the comic book?
No, we didn't. We self-published it. And the truth was it was a means to an end. And making a comic book is really, really hard. And is probably, as hard as making a movie in some ways. Because every single detail has to be thought through.
And frame by frame by frame by frame.
Yeah. And the truth is I'm not a comic book creator. But at the time it just seemed like the right way to go. And it was a really helpful sales tool.
Yeah, it's a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah. Comic books are so connected to cinema because of the panels and the way you look, digest it.
It's the storyboard.
Yeah, it is. It was very much a storyboard for the movie.
So you made that film?
So I made that film. And it starred Juno Temple, who was just an amazing actress to work with, and I was so lucky that she was willing to take on that role of Alice, and Michael Angarano, who played John. And then lots of really amazing talent, like Alexis Bledel, who also...
Yeah. Rory.
Yeah, Rory. Which was actually great. I have so many fun stories about that movie, but what was great is I hadn't watched Gilmore Girls before making the film, so my relationship with Alexis was completely just based on her in the room. So
she was Alexis to you.
She was Alexis to me.
Not Rory.
Yeah, and in many ways the same is true of Juno and of Michael. I had seen bits of their work, but I hadn't really taken on anything like there's times where you can be so starstruck with a talent, and I had none of that, and rarely actually do now, but I think that kind of, this is like going down another road, but that kind of being starstruck can also be distracting from just doing the work and helping the person that is acting do the work.
Oh yeah, it can get in your way, I imagine. So what did you have to do in your brain to kind of transition from I'm doing 30 seconds to I'm telling a whole narrative story? What was your process?
Yeah, my process was to prepare myself for the marathon, because directing commercials is a sprint, and I'm really good at the sprint, and I didn't know if I'd be good at the marathon. And what I mean by that is that it's a long process in which it takes a lot of time to get people on board. So there's the development process, which is like, hey, I've got this idea, I've got this script, agree with me to make it, going out, month after month to try to get people to give you money. And then the actual process once you've got the money to prepare for your shoot. And then the shoot itself is really intense. So I spent a lot of time just with preparation. I just realized I had to focus in, and I did nothing else but focus in on making my movie. And the things that I did was to storyboard the entire film, which was kind of overkill because when I look at that book that I made of the storyboards of that film, it's just like, a lot of which could not be shot because it was so ambitious.
Yeah. But you were prepared.
I was prepared, and I was working with the actors, having them do their preparation about who the characters were and what their backstory was, so that they could really come to life. And I pulled so many references from movies that I loved and comic books that I loved, and I kept watching over and over Witches of Eastwick, which for me was really like and War of the Roses.
Oh God!
Yeah, they're really indelible. Like in my mind, they were really important films, and from my childhood, you know.
Did you go through any particular preparation to start really working with actors in that way?
I did. So in order to prepare to work with actors, I started taking acting classes.
Smart.
And we knew we were going to be shooting it in upstate New York, so what I did was worked with a really amazing acting company in Manhattan, and they allowed me to come in and take classes and then to actually work out the scenes, some of the scenes from the films, some of the more complex scenes that emotionally.
Yeah.
And so
With your film actors or with people in the class?
With just people in the classroom, which was great, because my actors were on other movies, so they were only going to be able to come a week ahead. So with other actors, I just tried out different techniques and learned a little bit more, came a little closer to understanding what actors need to hear and what help they need. And everyone ultimately is different, but like I learned that giving actionable verbs in a scene is much more useful than you're really happy here. You know, it's more like, flirt or, grab, like physical.
Yeah.
Real action verbs. And so,
did you participate as an actor too in the class?
I did, which was like the most frightening thing ever. As a director, you like want control over everything, then to suddenly be put into a moment where you're out of control and you are acting through it was a real gift.
Yeah, give you a whole new perspective, I bet.
Whole new perspective, yeah. And I went on to use a lot of what I learned in that acting class in the course of making the film. But the course of making the film was actually in itself the greatest class of all, because I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned from the mistakes every day, every week. I would, come back and reevaluate how I was approaching things, and whether it was like this is a thing that has been developed for me over years of directing commercials, but I'm used to talking to the actors. It's kind of like a Terrence Malick thing where you're rolling and you're talking and you're getting the performance and you're growing it and kind of like spinning it out of yarn, but it turns out that some actors don't like that. And I learned, they don't like to be talked to during a take, But, so the first week of shooting, I was like talking to them during these takes, and then I would also reset because I would see something that was out of whack, and they were getting really ticked off, they loved me, but they were getting ticked off. So I finally was like, okay, I can't do that anymore. So I would have to just wait patiently for the scene to be done, and then I'd go in
and gently give your notes.
And gently give my notes. So they really, those actors, Juno and Michael and, everyone who was in that film, taught me so much because of the fact that they all had come from incredible backgrounds of doing lots of work. Mm-hmm. And then I just learned also a lot about like what is actually, what you think you need and what you actually need, especially when it comes to an indie movie. Movies it's all about kind of scale and budget versus, what your vision is. And my vision was like for a big movie and my budget was like for a micro indie film. So I was like constantly pushing up against time limits and that like craziness of like, oh, we got to get it done.
Yeah. So does it make you really distill down to what is the most important thing I have to convey in this moment?
I think it does, but I think that I still need time to work that out as a director. Like, what are the most important points of the story? As a director, I understand that I need to hold in my mind, in my heart, my hand, where the story is going, what the arc of the story is, what the tone is, what I want the viewer to look at and to pay attention to. And I also find that in the edit, there's so much that happens that's different that sometimes you just need to shoot these extra pieces. You have to in order, and it may be completely beyond what you originally planned, but it gives you like an out. It gives you like a safety net. And so I've learned that is really as important in a way as all the planning that you can do, is to shoot that extra, those extra bits.
So you can have transitions and ways to move out of a scene?
Yeah, because sometimes you end up actually not even having that scene in anymore. I mean, that's the thing that's so incredible, is that you can go through and like put all this time and energy into a scene, and then you get into the edit and you realize that scene actually was just not as important as it once looked. And that's part of the thing about being a director-writer, because I have co-written on both of my movies, and actually the other films that I now have in development I've written. And so is that sometimes you get really attached to like this scene and you don't want to let it go.
Yeah, painful.
And so painful. And that's something I learned too, which is that during the development process, if I listened to what the notes were, I saved myself pain in production. But if I didn't, then I just had pain in production, pain in the post, because the same issues that were coming up in the notes from the reading came up in the notes from the first edit.
Now, do you edit yourself, or
No.
you have someone else editing?
No. Yeah, I've worked with others.
So how do you pick who you're going to take notes from in that process?
I think you have to pick people that you respect, clearly. And then you have to pick a number of people who are not close to you, because if they're too close, they're going to give you notes you want to hear.
Yeah,
and
they don't want to hurt your feelings.
They don't want to hear. Yeah, so generally I like to get notes from 5 to 6 different people when I have a question, and then see what's the uniting through line of those notes.
It's hard.
It is. It's really difficult. But as I grow as a filmmaker, it becomes more and more easy to be okay with everything. Yeah. I don't know. The first movie was so precious to me, and I was like, I kind of went into it with this attitude of like, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make the best movie. It was kind of like that.
Yeah.
That reality show, like, I'm not here to make friends.
And
I wanted to be liked, but at the same time I was like, I need to make the best movie. But actually behind all that, I really was worried what people felt and thought about me. So it was just this weird combination of being like, trying to make the best movie, but also being slightly insecure. Was I doing it right? Was it okay? All that. My second movie was a completely different process without that pain and suffering, in which I was just okay with what I was doing, and I was with the people that were very supportive of the vision, and it was not the same kind of stress level as what it was with my first movie. Making the Brass Teapot, we had investors, and it was, even though it was a small movie, it was still a lot of pressure. And here's the thing: I've worked on like multi-million-dollar campaigns with 20 clients, and that's pressure. But it's different when it's something that you really have created, because what you do is you go into an internal struggle of wanting to protect your creation, and that's really a challenge, because if you've got people paying for it and you're trying to protect your what you're making, your creation, then you're just in this, you're like, I'm pushing the boulder up to the top of the hill because there's this great view up here, whereas everyone's like, let's just keep the boulder down at the ground because it's much easier. So it was constantly like that. Whereas with my second film, I made it for less than my first and had none of the same pressures, and we just kind of followed the bliss of like, let's go here, and everyone would follow, and we had a strategy and a plan, but it was much more fluid, and
you were freer.
I was free.
Yeah. What's the name of the second film?
It's called Tattered a Million, and we just finished post, and it's premiering at the Heartland Film Festival in Indianapolis.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved with Girl Rising and what that experience was like?
Yeah. So Richard Robbins, who's the creator of Girl Rising, had reached out to me he and Holly Gordon had reached out to me and asked if I was interested in directing the Afghan segment. So Richard had directed a number of the segments, and he was reaching out to additional filmmakers to help, because he couldn't do them all. And
we should probably say this is a film about girls getting an education in
around the world. It's a film about what girls face around the world to get an education, from Peru to Uganda to Afghanistan.
Places where it's hard.
Haiti, where it's very hard, where it's not a given that a girl will get an education. And when I first saw the script, which was written by an incredible Afghani writer named Zari Zarguna, she had written a book called Dear Zari, which was all stories taken from her radio show that she did in Afghanistan, where widows would call in, and wives, and been through incredibly difficult situations in Afghanistan. She wrote this short script about a young girl named Fatima. It was based on a real girl who at 12 was married off for $5,000, the price of a Toyota, like used Toyota, to a husband, 3 times her age. And by the time she was 13, she had a baby. And she had been in school and she wanted to be a doctor, and this was devastating to her. And so the story was about her. We knew we couldn't film her because of the safety risks in Afghanistan. And so they brought this to me, and I was looking at it, and one of the key elements of it was that at the end, Fatima would take off her burqa, which is, the burqa is the robe, the dress that they wear over their heads so that you can't see their faces and they're completely shrouded. And I was, at the time, was really worried because I felt like as a person outside that culture, I didn't know how women felt about the burqa. I knew that many Muslim women really felt that their headdress was really important to them, and so I found it questionable that I would direct this piece about burqa slamming, basically. Yeah. So I had to do my own research before I was willing to come on board to make sure that in actuality that most women really do not like the burqa in the culture.
How do they feel about the burqa?
They hate the burqa.
Yeah.
It's like when you're in a cult, you just go along with what the cult is doing, and also it becomes part of your safety. But can you imagine you're in this hot, heavy duty cloth all day?
No, we can't imagine it for 1 second.
You can't imagine it for 1 second. Once I got clear that it's very different than the headdress. The burqa is really, medieval. Mm-hmm. It goes past their ankles. You can't see any skin, and that you can actually be punished if anyone sees your wrist or your ankle. I realized, okay, we can go ahead and burqa shame,
Yeah.
And so then I came on, and I really wanted to tell the story as a story, as opposed to recreating interviews as if it was Fatima. I wanted to just tell her story and do it in a very, very visual way. And so I worked on the script with Zari to create, a narrative to it. And then we had to choose a location that would look like Afghanistan. We couldn't shoot in Afghanistan. We knew we couldn't use the real child.
Where did you shoot?
I'm not allowed to say because of the safety of the people who were in it, but what I will tell you, it was close, and it completely looked just like Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And I had this incredible experience, which was that we were casting in a bigger part of the city, not in the village that we knew we were going to be shooting in. We were looking for the right girl who was supposed to be 12. And all the girls that were coming in looked so much older. They were 15, but even at 15 they looked older because it was a city. And we were location scouting up in the village, in these remote mountains. And one day we were in this mud hut, and this little girl came out, and was taking pictures, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I kind of indicated, do you want me to take a picture? And she was, nodded, and I took a picture of her. And when I looked at her through the lens, I was like, oh my God, this is the girl. Mm. And she was so tiny, and she really was 12. And so I went back to my producers, and I was like, this is the girl. We need to arrange to see if the family will let me audition her.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, oh my God, she's so young, she barely has breasts, all these things.
That's what 12 looks like.
That's what 12 looks like. And that's what I said. And I called up Richard from this remote location on a satellite phone, and I said, this is what I'm thinking. And he said, go for it,
Yeah.
And so the audition looked like something like a therapy session. Basically, it was like me sitting there. I still have that tape. And I'm sitting there with this child, and I told her the story, so she knew the story, which was far enough away from her own life, but close enough that she could understand what.
That wasn't going to happen to her?
It wasn't going to happen to her, not at 12, but probably at
15,
17 or 18.
Yeah.
And so I asked her, I said, what I want you to do is think about the saddest thing you can think of. Because, how do you, when you work with kids or adults, and I do this a lot, who have never acted, you have to figure out how to access, whether they can access emotion.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see if she could access the emotion. The first thing she said, I said to her, think of the saddest thing that's ever happened to you. And we had a translator, by the way, because we did not speak the same language. And she said, nothing sad has ever happened to me. And here she is in a mud hut with no electricity, no running water, one bedroom. And that's what her answer was. And then her mother called out and said, in their language, remember 2 weeks ago you had the flu? And so I said, okay, think about that. Think about what happened when you had the flu and how you felt. And her eyes teared up. And she started crying. And I just knew, okay, I can help her do it.
Isn't that amazing that we may look at our life like what has gone right? Mm-hmm. And she thinks it's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really the challenge of living in the first world, is that we have so much going for us, that things are so easy, and yet we're
still complaining.
We complain, we're miserable, and I'm not saying that there isn't suffering. Obviously there's suffering in other places, but what you find is that when your basic needs are taken care of, suffering in most of these countries just doesn't exist. Your suffering comes from almost too much idleness.
Yeah. It becomes all your psychological angst.
Yeah.
Rather than your needs.
So being a part of that film changed my life because it woke me up to the importance of educating girls. Mm-hmm. And not that, I don't think you can talk to anyone who wouldn't agree, yes, it's important for girls to get education. But it became my mission, and I started to see it everywhere in terms of what could I do. And so in 2014, when I heard a small radio show that was doing a story about an event that just happened where 276 Nigerian schoolgirls had been kidnapped. I had the breath punched out of me by that news, and I was so upset when I went online and tried to find any information. There was nothing, and it was because of my experience. Well, first of all, it was because I just felt human and felt so miserable, so sad for these families, these girls, that this atrocity happened. But it was because also I realized how valuable these girls were to their society and to us as a world, that I got very involved with helping to spread the news about the kidnapping and to bring it to the United States social media, and to try to help put pressure on the government to work to rescue those girls. And so it's so interesting.
What did you do?
What I did is I launched a social media campaign, and the advocates in Abuja, Nigeria, who had begun that week to speak out against the government's lack of action, had been saying things like hashtag bring back our girls, hashtag bring back our daughters. And I started in my news searching, I found those. And what I did is I just tweeted to every single celebrity I could think of, from Oprah to Beyonce to Chris Brown to President Obama, Michelle Obama. I just sent it out to everyone, have you heard this information? Do you know what's going on? And then I went on Facebook and I created a Facebook page called Bring Back Our Girls. And I created a red mnemonic that said Bring Back Our Girls. And I asked every one of my friends on Facebook to march on social media to raise awareness and change their profile pic. And it's within the first few days, like 10,000 people joined, and then 20, and then 30 and 40, and then by the end of the week, I was getting calls from the BBC and CNN and ABC, every major network, asking me to speak live about this thing. And at the time, I was like, finally, the story is being told.
Yeah.
And so I was...
And talk about one person can make a difference.
Well, I do think one person could make a difference, and I do think that I was part of a team of people making a difference, because what was happening was in Abuja, there was hundreds of these incredible Nigerian advocates led by OBS Wigzeli, who were meeting every day at the Abuja Unity Fountain, and they were protesting. So they were putting their lives at risk. Police were coming and like abusing them and, you know, trying to trash their peaceful protest. Well, I was like behind a computer and had roped in a team of other people to help me with this, because what ended up happening is when the news started breaking, thousands of people all over the world started writing in and asking what they could do. And so we became like Grand Central. We became like the organization for people to march globally. So somebody in like Ireland would want to march, I would create their Facebook event, and then anybody in the area who wanted to march would be able to see them. So it was like this incredible way to organize and to help people advocate. And we created action items, and so it was really exciting to see the story be told. It was so upsetting because it didn't lead to the rescue.
Yeah.
So it was really, really agonizing. Every day I kept thinking this will be the day, and you know, and now, you know, it's 3 years have gone by, and you know, very painful. But
did they get some of them back recently?
They did. They did get some of them back, and you know, originally I believe it was 58 girls escaped from the original group
at the time.
At the time, and I did help in that first year to raise funds for 12 of the girls to come to the U.S. and get educated, and because they wanted to be in a safe place, and they felt that was the right thing. Then there was like one girl who escaped, and then there was like 20 something that negotiated, and then recently, I believe it was 89. I may have it wrong in terms of the figure, but I have it all written down, and it's important information to get accurate, so I don't want to give inaccurate information, but I think it was 80 something were rescued.
So there's still some that are missing.
There's a lot. There's 130 that are missing. And, you know, what I want to say about that, what happened with that, is it's still happening, because the story is not over. We're still in the story. What I want to say about that is that was such an interesting thing, because it was set. Here I had come from making film and also advocacy as a young filmmaker. And then I made a film that ignited my own advocacy, and then I was awakened to this atrocity, and I had to get involved. And so it taught me a lot about, first of all, making a difference. It also taught me a lot about press and how not to handle press, and I hadn't known about that before. And it taught me that there are other ways to help the world beyond film, which I had always thought that film was going to be the only way that I could make a difference. And it also taught me that there's always unintended consequences for our actions, that in some ways I don't know that what I did was absolutely, unequivocally the right thing. And what I mean by that is, because of all the social media work that was done and the fact that so many people globally got involved, you know, the story of these girls became international news. And then suddenly the value of what it meant for them to be held hostage and to try to get them shifted.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that had not happened, if it would have been easier to rescue them. I also don't know if we hadn't been, all of us advocates, if we hadn't done the work, if it would have just continued with no one telling the story, because the government 3 or 4 weeks later after the kidnapping, still had not acknowledged it. But a lot of these things come
So how are you supposed to know what to do or what the right thing is?
It's really important to be aware of what you're doing and to realize that what you're doing could have unintended consequences. And when, the Facebook page that suddenly had 280,000 people on it, I was receiving a lot, obviously hundreds and hundreds of messages daily. And at one point I received a message from an anonymous, like somebody who was clearly not the person that they said they were, and it was of a 13-year-old girl being stoned to death in a village. And you can only imagine receiving that message and what that did to me. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Like all of this social media, they're now killing these girls. No, it turned out that video was from years before and no less incredibly horrific. But the point was that it really made me realize that just because we think it's right just because we think our actions are right doesn't mean they're always right. And at the same time, when you see an injustice, you have to do something. You have to stand up. I think I would in the future now, I will always give a little more thought about it, because I learned the hard way. I learned the hard way because of the fact that the girls are still not rescued, and I also learned the hard way because I received death threats. I received incredible cyberbullying. I received so many things that it's hard to really put into context. I gave a TED Talk actually about this. I finally spoke about it in November of last year about what happened. But there were so many things that I could not have predicted from that first week when I leaped into trying to help. Mm-hmm. And that said, I wouldn't change my participation, nor would I change the passion that I still feel about this. I think I would just have gone about it a slightly different way in terms of managing the narrative out into the news space, managing how to really work with it. I'm not sure, because I hope I don't have to go through that event again, but I definitely learned a lot.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny to hear about that and Afghanistan, and we're here banging the drum about female directors in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. It seems a little, maybe less important in the big scheme of things, but still incredibly important, because everybody needs to be able to tell their story, so that we can influence the world. And commercials is pretty much a boys' club. Is it not? Is it still?
I think the whole film industry, advertising and entertainment, is a boys' club.
How has that been for you to navigate that?
Well, because I was so young and I was allowed to do so much early, I didn't really notice the sexism that was really pervasive, because I was a teenager, so it was I was getting...
Wasn't true for you.
Yeah, well, I was the anomaly, I was super unusual. But that said, it's become clearer and clearer to me, especially as I, will go up against other directors, male directors, for example, on a sports project, because I do a lot of action in sports, and I'll have the reel that's definitely more developed. Clearly, I've done that work that shows, that I can do it. Mm-hmm. I'll give a great conference call, because I feel really good about my conference calls, and do a great treatment, and then I won't get the job. And it'll go to a director, a male director who's done 1 or 2 projects. And it's very clear that the creatives chose the person that they felt the most familiar with. Right. And that's, a thing. So that's been frustrating. And also frustrating is just, I have a feeling of a glass ceiling within the commercial industry that I'm trying to break through, which is just to get those better boards. To get those better scripts, to be involved in those bigger campaigns. And women are oftentimes relegated to doing, feminine products and emotional emotional kind of spots.
Yeah.
And my work has been different. It's been more about sports and action, and also real human stories. And I've tried to avoid like the saccharine storytelling element. And so I can get really frustrated, like, well, I should be bid on that one great, project, and yeah, I'm like becoming more and more aware of this as I get older, is like, okay, I'm now in my 30s and going, yeah, I want that script. I want to do that job.
Yeah.
I'm not happy with just, doing these other things. I've noticed that there has been a shift with Free the Bid. Free the Bid is an initiative started by Alma Harrell, and she put it out there to basically the industry and said, a woman should be bid on every single commercial project. And really, a woman should be bid on any project where you're hiring a female in entertainment. And so I have seen an influx of projects because of that. And so, that I think has been a great initiative. And I think those kinds of initiatives are so, so important, because if you don't hold people's feet to the fire, nothing will change.
Right.
It's just like...
And if you can't even get the board to bid on, you're never getting the job.
If you can't get the board to bid on, you'd never get the job. It's so true. And the thing is that we need female voices, because you have to have a difference in perspective. It's like, women and the way they see things is so important. And the truth is that most consumers are female. Like they're the consumers. So the fact that men continue to drive these like ideas, drive the execution of them, all these things is really problematic. And one of the reasons why I believe the industry is failing from an advertising standpoint to some degree is that you can't live in this bubble. You have, women are storytellers. We live and breathe on story, and we don't like facts. We don't like, oh, it's 3.9 and the 7-year whatever, like those kind of things, which is like gets put a lot. You'd be surprised at how many things that people put in ads about facts. Women don't care about that, but we care about
data.
They don't care about the data. They care about the stories and the emotion. And so when you have women creating those stories and making the scripts, and you have women directing them, then you have more effective reach in advertising. The same thing goes for entertainment. Really, really true, which is that when you have women getting to tell, female stories, you suddenly have women coming back into the theaters and tuning in and watching because they're connected to the stories, because they're meaningful to them. But for so long, we've been like brainwashed to think that the men's stories are like, that's the hero's journey.
The story.
That's the story, That's,
Everything else is other and niche. Mm-hmm. So really, everyone's going to make more money.
Everyone's just going to make more money if women are given a chance to sit in the driver's seat and tell the stories. People will definitely make more money if I'm given the opportunity to direct and tell my stories. And that is, and that's like the thing for me. It's not about money, actually. I was saying that as a joke, but I love the art of what I do, but it's actually more for me about the communication. And what I mean by that is that I wasn't one of those filmmakers who started out with like this obsessive mental Rolodex of every great film or all of these super unusual camera stuff. I always came from it from a standpoint of story and communication. And so for me, my goal is to tell big stories to a big audience. And that is, so it's kind of odd in a way that I've, so far only made 2 indie movies, but it's all about access ultimately. And once I get the access, once I get the access, I'll be doing those bigger films. And
then forget about it.
That's my trajectory is to, and I've been writing bigger stories so that I can have those opportunities. And, women are not always our best advocates. Like, I've learned that we don't often toot our own horns and we don't praise ourselves, whereas a man is much more willing to sit and say, here's what they're good at.
Yeah, we'll wait.
We'll wait for someone else to like, oh, you did well in this. But I am like stopping that. I'm going to tell you that I am an amazing director with action, I'm an amazing director with talent. I have more on-set experience than most experienced feature film directors, and I come in on time and under budget, and so I know what I am capable of doing, and so a lot of what is happening in my career is just me advocating for myself now.
I love it. Now, let's talk a little bit about Adolescents. What's the actual name of it?
Adolescent.
Adolescent. That's an agency, production company?
So we are all of those things. So founded in 2013, we are an ideation think tank. We work with Gen Z prodigious talent to come up with concepts for brands around campaigns to reach a young audience. We work with ad agencies too to help their clients. We then produce that content. So, for example, we just produced a campaign for Target directed by a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. And we did a project for Netflix where we helped promote their show 13 Reasons with a series of 3 branded content pieces. And they needed directors in 3 different countries. And we represent directors in 12 different countries. So we had a teen directing branded content piece in the US, one in Australia, and one in Canada. So we work with these incredible directors to help brands tap into really the brilliance of youth and what it is to have peer-to-peer communication, which it turns out that this age group really doesn't care about anyone's products. They don't care about what they have to sell. They don't care about all that. They just care what their friends think. So when you can tap into their peers, their highly talented peers, you have something that is extremely effective. And so we create advertising and we create entertainment. So our directors have created over a dozen scripted, serialized shows and 3 feature scripts. And we launched a digital platform last year called Adolescent.net, which is all content made by young people. So it's kind of like what Vice is to millennials, we are to adolescents. And the content ranges from nonfiction to fiction, written, video, stills. It's an incredible creative space, and it's highly curated. And we receive submissions, dozens of submissions all day long. And we pay our creators to make content for the digital platform. And our directors get paid really well to direct commercials. So
it's kind of genius. How did what made you think of it?
I was a teen director.
Yeah.
And I was always mentoring young directors. And about 5 years ago, I was mentoring a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 19-year-old. And I just kept thinking everything they did was so good. It was so youthful, obviously. And it was like capturing their friends and what they were living in a way that I just knew I would never be able to do. I couldn't walk in and just like do that. So I thought, what would happen if I connected these young directors with brands who are trying to speak to young audiences? And that's when the idea of Adolescent came to me. And it just immediately, I signed the directors I was mentoring and started meeting other incredible young directors. And it just turns out that, like myself, there is a whole wave of really incredible talent that has been making work since they were like 5.
They all grew up with a camera in their hands?
Yeah, they did. And they like at 5, we have one director who made his first stop motion film out of Legos at 5 years old. And like the stories like that just go on and on. We have a 15-year-old director named Anaya who just finished directing her first feature film, and it's amazing. And so that's how the company grew with my partner Hope Farley, and she really worked on the production side as a producer, and I really worked on the creative side as like a recruiting the talent and helping grow them, and really speaking to the clients, because when a client's going to hand over a $2 million campaign to a 13-year-old, it's a little nerve-wracking.
It seems unlikely.
But what I do is I kind of serve as the insurance, like the bond that they will be able to deliver. And my career runs in parallel to everything that Adolescent does, because oftentimes I'll direct a campaign, like the broadcast campaign, and then Adolescent directors will direct the social media assets. Yeah. So I'm able to help bring in this next generation of female and minority directors by using whatever reputation I have, the good reputation I have, to help them get work and get paid. And we represent 80% females and minorities.
I love it. Now, since you mentor young people all day long, what is your advice for young people starting out?
My advice for young people starting out is to just make work and not get stuck in whether it's good or whether it's even done well at first, because you have to just make work, and you have to have a certain amount of work under your belt in order to get to a level of proficiency. And then in order to get to mastery, you have to have a lot of work. So the first thing is, if you want to be a director, you have to direct. Mm-hmm. So whenever anyone comes to me and says, I'm a director and I really want to get into commercials, I say, well, what have you done? And oftentimes people have not done anything, and I say, well, then you're not a director,
You want to be a director.
You want to be a director. So you have to make work, and then once you've made a bunch of work, then you need to start to refine it. You need to look out into the world and see what's being done so you can compare, because that's really important to know. You need to know what the quality of work is that's needed. Mm-hmm. And then you need to go and forget all of that and make the very best work you can do. And then from there, you need to get people to give you their feedback, because unfortunately this industry is not like painting. You don't get to just sit and be all alone. You have to get other people to agree. Yeah, you have to get people to agree to give you the job. So in order to that, it takes feedback. So I recommend that people work to make the work, and then they develop a reel. And specifically, just to be very specific, a reel is not a montage of like scenes that you've shot, cut together to pretty music. That is not a reel. That's a reel for a editor or a DP. If you want to be a director, what you need to do is shoot 4 to 5 pieces of work that have a beginning, a middle, and end, that are complete. And you need to make sure they look good and that they tell the story or convey the message, and you need to then put those in a format, whether it's online or really everything should be online, and then that's a reel. So now what I look at is I look at someone's work and I see those 4 to 5 pieces, and I think immediately, oh yeah, I could get them a job with Nike. And it's really ideal if you are clear about what your message and your vision is. So if you do a lot of different things well, that's great, but it can be hard in the commercial world because they really want you to be specific. You're good at comedy, you're good at action, you're good at humanity, you're good at fashion, whatever. So it's hard for people to have you be good at all of those things. So it's best if you want to actually work.
Pick something early.
Pick something early and really narrow in on that, and make sure it's something you're going to want to do long term.
Yeah.
Because I have seen a lot of people pick, I don't know, some really odd choices. Like they've done these classic commercials with product goods, and it's just like, okay, you're going to end up doing that for a real long time. Like people they want to put you in a box so they know where to use you. So pick what you really like to do and then do it and just hone it and make it as good as it can be.
Really smart. Are you a success?
I am a success. I am a success. Yeah.
Are you a badass?
I am a badass.
I love how you're just owning all of it.
Yeah.
Is there anything we didn't talk about that you still wanted to talk about?
That's always my question.
No, it's my question.
It's so funny. It's my question. I literally, in every interview, I just got done with a campaign for Chevy, and it's in the post-production phase right now, and I got to interview Billie Jean King and Michelle Kwan and amazing women. It was all about a sports initiative. And, when I interview them at the end, I would say, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about? So, so I just told you that I just told you, which was the story about the commercial I just did.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, A Herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Ramaa Mosley for sharing her story, and special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Podbay, and subscribe and leave a review. And of course, on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, for added features, bios of our guests, pictures, and the merchandise. And now on YouTube, where you'll start to see these interviews on video. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Other50% and Instagram at Other50% Podcast. And don't forget to check out The Other 50%, A Herstory of Tech. Thanks for listening. See you next time.